welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on this webinar that had three titles. The primary title is Tiny Data, Big Impact, because what we are talking about today is the power of sharing. With me, I have, first, let me tell you, as with all things GTIA, this is operated under our antitrust statement and our code of conduct. If you have any questions, need more, the links are there. You can also reach out to me directly, and I will be happy to share the links with you. And with that, I am going to kick it over to our incredible presenters today. Jason Slagle, president of CNWR, also chair of the GTIA ISAO Advisory Group, and Wes Spencer, co-founder of Empath and cybersecurity expert in all things. And with that, I'm going to let Jason and Wes take over and kind of tell you what we're talking about today.
Yeah, I'll start. So as Lisa said, I'm Jason Slagle, president of CNWR, also chair of the ISAO Advisory Group, like the thing that's had like 4 names in the several months I've been doing it. So apparently multiple names for things is a repeating pattern here. I'm joined here with Wes. You want to do an intro on yourself, Wes?
What's up? Yeah, it's good to see y'all. I'm a cyber nerd like Jason. These days I'm really heads down in Empath, really getting my new company off the ground. We're about 1.5 years into the journey, but I do have a pretty big background in cyber intelligence and cyber intelligence sharing, and we'll talk more about that as we kind of jump into it. But was very involved inside of the financial services ISAC, which is the largest ISAC in the world by like membership. And I'm really passionate about all of this, even though it's been kind of years since I've been directly involved through Perch and then, of course, FS ISAC before that. But I think I'm really passionate about what's happening here in the MSP space and what y'all are doing with the GTIA ISAO. I think it's really, really awesome. So yeah, thanks for having me. And we should turn this into a great discussion. I want questions and all that good stuff.
And we're going to roll this pretty informally. So you can probably go ahead and drop the slides now, Lisa, if you want to not take up the whole screen with slides.
Hard to see my face, yeah.
Look at magic. Yeah, so we're gonna roll this relatively informally, right? Like in Wes, I want to remind you, right? So the entire reason that I picked you to have this conversation is you may not remember, or you may vaguely remember, there was a time at the first Right of Boom where we rode in a helicopter.
We did.
Which was a whole different story for a whole nother day, but it was absolutely amazing and awesome. We actually had the helicopter do circles over ConnectWise's sales kickoff just to troll them a little bit. But that's irrelevant to this story. What is relevant to this story is that was right around the time that I began my involvement with what was then the GTIA ISAO, right? They had just taken it over from ConnectWise when ConnectWise ran it. Right. And you and I had a probably 25 minute long discussion while we were making our way from that Renaissance down to that little teeny tiny airport down on Davis Island about your experience in the FSISAC and the value that the small contributors can bring to the table. Right. And you had some really good discussions and stories about how people like even Chase came to you and said that, you know what, there's a lot of value in this data. So I don't know if you're recalling this conversation at all.
Yeah, I do. So one of the things that I learned in my banking days with ISACs and ISAOs, and we'll talk a lot about this, but I'll just intro it this way. Man, sharing is really important. And I had a friend, still do, works for I guess I'll just say the largest bank in England. It's probably the best way to say it. So massively, massively large. They put their names on like, Premier League stadiums and all that. And he made this comment to me one day in passing. We were just talking at a conference. He said, I know you small banks. Like I was part of, so I was I was the chair of what's called the Community Institution Council, which is all banks 10 billion and below. So basically anyone that Dodd-Frank didn't fit into, the vast majority of banks, by the way. And he made this comment to me. He said, I know you small banks feel like your involvement is light and little compared to what we big banks do, right? Because we big banks have fusion centers and full-time threat analysts and all this stuff they pour into it. He said, but there's one thing I just want to encourage you with, and it's never left me. He said, your ability to see and understand what's happening in your bank is so much better than what I can see. And I'm like, what do you mean? And he said, well, I'll give you an example. He said, I have Class Cs. I have thousands of Class C networks that I know nothing about, that I don't know anything about where they're come from, what their business use case is. He goes, don't even get me started on this CIS 1 and 2 journey. Like, we are so far away from being where we need to be because we are massive. So he said, when you share something with me that you know a lot about, because you know your network way better than we do, that is so actionable and useful to us. And it blew me away, Jason, because I had never heard anyone say that before. And it really made me start to ponder and wonder, well, then why don't the smaller banks who see more information more accurately speak up more? And I think that bleeds into the MSP space, doesn't it?
Well, yeah, and I think that, right, like you and I have had lots of conversations along this way, right? I think sometimes, like, we can trace this down to imposter syndrome, right? We can trace this down to, I don't have anything interesting to say. I'm not really seeing anything super interesting, right? Like, there's nothing here. Like, what value do I, as a little $2 million MSP, have with these attacks and these attempts I'm seeing against my customers, when these gigantic customers, right? Like, they're sharing, but like, how is the value? What is the value in the data that I bring here, right? It's like, I have only a handful, we'll call it 40 to 60 customers, right? It seems like that is noise, right? It seems like there's not enough signal in that data to be able to meaningfully do anything with it, right? So why should I share it?
Right. Yeah. And so let's talk about that a little bit, right? Because let's say you are a MSP of 20 employees, something like that, right? Yep. Or smaller. I get that, right? But the thing that I think you should recognize is, if you're starting to see a trend, you're going to know a lot about that trend, because you know every single one of your customers, you know every single one of their networks, you probably you understand, you know their tech stack. So you understand kind of the threat landscape, or the battlefield is what we should really call it. You know the battlefield that you're fighting on way better than some huge MSP or some huge service provider that has an enormous battlefield they've never stepped foot on, at least on the vast majority of it. So we say that to say, like, when you start to notice curiosities and oddities and pickups and things, you don't necessarily have to be the one to say, well, I'm going to go like grab some of this, I'm going to go take this phishing link and I'm going to go trace it to its dead end and reverse it and provide back something that a threat analyst would do. But you don't have to do that. If you do even the minimum of, like, hey, I just want to report this. I'm starting to see this trend. I've got 3 phishing emails that have all come in that seem to be indicating this XYZ. Maybe it's, it seems to be some kind of screen connect, connection attempt of some kind to get access to it. I'm just sharing that to let you know. Well, what does that do? That lets other people say, we're seeing the same thing. I got one of those. They saw 4 of those. And now what we get is, and we'll talk about this maybe later, but that TTP pyramid of pain, maybe we're getting too deep too fast. But what we're doing, I'll just tease it this way, we can get into it later, is we're stepping up into the intent of the attacker. And now we're starting to live in the space where their strategy layer is a good way to say it, to say, wait, now we're getting in front of, maybe they're going after something from a dedicated focus, and we can cut the head off the snake before something really bad happens.
Well, and we see that, right? Even we have a good number of clients in the manufacturing or manufacturing adjacent space. Like, I'm an MSP in Toledo, Ohio, for better or worse. We are the Rust Belt. We are like Detroit's little loogie, like like it's we have a lot of automotive, we have glass manufacturing, we have a lot of manufacturing here. And I'll already see that a supplier will have a business email compromise, in several of my clients will get attempts from that single business email compromise, right? So even at my size, I am seeing some correlation there, right? So like, if you consider that, okay, well, now I'm seeing an increase of business email compromise attacks against my manufacturing clients, like, what does it take to correlate that to a bigger group?
Yep, right. And so, and this is where maybe we should talk about this, because I'm not, let me explain how like FSISAC would do it. And I'd love, Jason, for you to share, because I'm curious how CompTIA ISAO would do it. We think, so first of all, we've said, please share, because you're sharing, you might think it's little, but it's actually a lot, because you're going to have higher confidence in what you're sharing. So that's the first part. But one of the things that an ISAC or an ISAO will typically do on the back end is they'll start to do the collection and the correlation of that information so that they can then hand that in an intelligence report back to its members as a whole and say, collectively, we're seeing a lot of this or a new trend on this. And so your sharing is what feeds the ability to have not just the first sight into these things, but also the collective output. And so what FSISAC would do, they actually had researchers that would take those, we call them indicators of compromise, and start to correlate that and say, well, we're seeing X, Y, and Z, and you should be aware of it in these industries, or this attack type, or this type of system is under focus. And that's so valuable because then as a member, I can go read the threat report and make my decisions correctly based upon what that threat report says, right? And so just know that good ISACs and ISAOs are going to do a lot of the handling from the information you're giving it and turn it into a bit more of a polished good. And Jason, I'm curious, what does CompTIA ISAO do? Do they have a team that does that kind of stuff?
Oh, you owe everybody in this room, you owe everyone in the room a drink. That is the rule. If you say the old name, you owe everyone a drink.
I got you. I'll make it happen. I'm good on that.
Yeah. So GTIA has a partnership with the IT ISAC, right? So we are not an ISAC. We're an ISAO. I actually only can kind of tell you the difference between the two of them, other than that I know one of them is government funded and the other one is not, I believe is the biggest difference. But we're an information sharing and analysis organization, whereas an ISAC is an information sharing and analysis center.
Something like that.
Yeah, I'm actually looking it up now. Yeah, so 100%.
My dumb level of the difference between the two, the way I explain it is like ISACs were set up in the 90s to really facilitate what's called, there's a word, like a critical infrastructure. And then ISAOs, and I have this view, John Strand said this to me one time, and it's never left me. John Strand said, I hate critical infrastructure. I hate the term. He's like, because why are we designating certain things critical? And if, for example, how are MSPs not critical infrastructure? We've seen time and time again.
Not? Yeah. Well, and just interestingly enough, if you start to look at things like CISA and that, they actually do consider small business critical infrastructure, right? So like, I actually think we probably could make a push to become an ISAC. Now that I've said it out loud, Wayne's going to angrily text me as he does every time I bring it up. But we have to bring this back, we have a partnership with IT ISAC, right? Which is basically the ISAC for information technology, and their analysts, when we submit threats into our threat submission forum, they will usually go and enrich that, do a little bit of research, get other data, and then they submit and they create their own report on it. That report comes out via the IT ISAC and then is syndicated back into us via a feed we have from them, and it goes into Alien Vault OTX along with that, right? So it goes into our basically the equivalent of Stig and
Stigs and
tax, taxi. It goes into the system that basically can hold and keep track of the IOCs with that.
Yep. Okay, cool. So now you know, if you're listening today, that you're not just sharing into a black hole, you're sharing into a team of people that are going to collect, assemble, and do something with it, right? So I'm curious to know in chat, for those that are here today, anyone using any of those threat reports? Anyone pulled them in, and maybe Jason, for you, have you used them when they come in?
Right now, I consume them via the email feed that I get from them. I am not actually consuming any of it outside of OTX right now. The platforms that I'm using on the back end to do that stuff don't support getting that stuff in that format. I'm actually pushing on them to be able to consume that data. But yeah, I'm consuming the email notifications that come out of that, and fairly frequently I read pretty much all of them I get, and fairly frequently, if it's relevant, I share it into our internal channels and say, hey, like, keep an eye out for this stuff. Let's take a look at it. We might pop some firewall rules in or some monitoring rules based on it. But I am pushing companies in our space, especially in the SIM space, to be able to consume that data directly, right? Like being able to consume the IOCs in a programmatic fashion instead of, like, hey, it's one thing to get an email that says, hey, there's an increase of these things. It's another thing to be able to say, hey, there's an increase in these things. These are the people doing it. These are the IPs that are in the IOCs. Like, here's now your firewall and your SIM is monitoring for those things so that it's going to alert if you see any traffic from those things. That's a tremendously higher amount of value there.
I remember years ago when we first at my bank, we first plugged in our threat intelligence feeds into our SIM. We were a Splunk shop. And I remember one of the very first threat reports that we ran was that big something bear. It was one of the Russia, it was like the 2013 era Russia stuff. And we started running all those IOCs through, and we got a bunch of hits. And I remember initially like panicking and walking over to my security analyst running all this. I'm like, uh-oh, what's going on? What are we seeing? And it was kind of like an all hands, oh no kind of moment until we started digging and we realized, oh, we're just seeing, and this keep in mind, these IOCs were supposedly vetted from the FBI to us. And we saw a ton. What was hitting were things like Twitter APIs, things like that. They're just
Yeah.
the noise that hadn't been cleaned out. And that's one of the problems. That's why I'm reading everyone, most people saying you're reading the emails. Good. That's where you should be. I would encourage most of you, don't try to bite off more than you can chew yet.
Yes.
If you're just consuming the email notifications and doing some light searching and things like that, that is a maturity level that the vast majority of ISAC members of all kinds, that's where they sit. And I'm going to share why. I'm going to put this into chat. This is what's called the TTP pyramid of pain. Jason, I'm sure you've seen this a lot as well. But the idea behind this is when we're sharing what we call indicators of compromise.
Yep.
One of the things that we see all the time is it's easy to share things like hash values,
Yep.
IP addresses, even domain names, because they're easy to see, they're easy to share, they're easy to report, but they're also very ephemeral, meaning that I can change them as a bad guy very, very quickly.
Yes.
And so by the time I share an IP address, it's probably changed, right? And so therefore, if I'm going to use those lower areas that are easy to share, and I'm going to use that for my detection response, I'm probably going to have a lot of noise in the system, which means if I don't have the team to be able to properly handle that, I probably shouldn't worry about those things as much. Where we want to do is we want to step upward, like we were talking about before, ideally all the way into the TTPs, the tools, tactics, procedure kind of stuff. It's just that that's hard to do on our own, but that's where the ISAO can come in and really kind of help build the picture from the lower stuff that you're submitting.
Yeah. And that will be like the first part of our journey when we do that, right? Like obviously, OTX, which is the platform we're using for that data sharing, it has fields for the lower half of that, right? But it's really hard to share a TTP. Like does Stig and Taxi hold that data? Like is there a pragmatic way to share a TTP out?
Yeah, so there are, and there's a number of ways to share IOCs over sticks. So in my day, it was all XML. Now it's all JSON. And so it's well documented. It's very easy to communicate. But the problem is you either have to do it in an automated way, which for almost 99.9% of MSPs is too expensive, too difficult, and not worth the daily spend. Or it's a manual process. And a lot of those like threat intel platforms have some kind of submission process. You can literally just log in and then you can share. But what I would encourage people to do is let's actually take this up even easier. I don't know the best way that your members share, but if it's it could be an email list, it could be forums. None of those are ideal, but okay. Yeah. So that it's not ideal, but it's better than nothing. Right. And so what I would focus on sharing is not like a big log from like your firewall and this thing that you're seeing. I would start with very simple things like, hey, I'm starting to notice maybe some kind of MFA push fatigue that I'm starting to see this come through. And I've seen this 8 times and here's what it looks like. And I'm just sharing a couple things about it and leave it there. And then what you may have happen is more people start to come and say the same thing. And now a discussion comes into it. You might have a CompTIA a GTIA,
that's 2 drinks.
2 drinks. No, I didn't say it that time. A GTIA ISAO.
It's hard, isn't it?
I didn't finish it. So it's 2 drinks. Come back to you and say, tell me more about that. Can you send me that log information? Can you give me some other stuff? And that is so valuable through this.
Well, and you can share, right? Like, hey, I'm seeing an increase of phishing attempts, and they're coming in via these domains, right? Like, I think there's value in that. I think there's 2.5 drinks. What's a half drink? It's a half drink is a Malort.
There you go.
For sure. So. I'm starting to see these things come in. These are the domains they're coming from, right? Like I think there is value in bringing those domains, but to your point, it's a game of whack-a-mole, right? Especially right now, a lot of the stuff we see on the business email compromise, like and I'm knocking here, we've been lucky to not have any real big issues with clients Hold on. My headset switched over to the phone when somebody called me. We've been lucky to not have a good amount of issues other than we see business email compromise fairly regularly. It's oftentimes not our client. It's some vendor or supplier of theirs. But most of those BEC emails right now are going to Evilgenics proxies, right? And those things don't last very long, right? So while I do believe there's value in sharing those things, to your point, they also don't last very long, right? But part of the reason they don't last very long is because people are reporting and sharing on them.
Yep, that's right. And so we can take like an analogy from the animal kingdom for a minute. Like how many animals that operate in groups and herds, they have ways that the herd is protected because the entire edges of the herd are all watching for things. And one quick signal over here filters very quickly in to say we have a predator and we need to take these actions, right? And so therefore you end up getting things happening where the other edge of the herd is taking action without even having seen or knowing about the threat. And that's sort of like part of the pie in the sky that, like in my days, Jason, like that was always the discussion. Can we get all this so automated to where like I see one thing and then bam, I get automatic blocking and all this kind of stuff. And I wish, but yeah, to your point, you can't because so much of this is ephemeral. So again, focus on the most valuable parts, which is just sharing what you're seeing.
Yeah, I mean, so I think this is very validating here, right? Because you were dealing with giant banks, right? And giant banks couldn't get this right with their giant bank budgets, right? So I think it's easy to go as a small guy going, you know what? There's really no value in this. It's doomed. I can't do it, right? Like I'll never have the budget. I'll never have anything to be able to process this. But just know the giant banks aren't doing it any better.
Yeah. Think about that for a minute, right? Those that have literal millions of dollars, not in their security budgets, sometimes that's hundreds of millions. They have literally millions, if not tens of millions, just in their threat intel budgets. Like I've seen it. I've worked with those people. I know those people. And it's a never-ending process of what you just said of whack-a-mole. And they can get away with it because they kind of have to. And systemically, they're so large. So yeah, that's where I love that because we can learn a lot from it. And just it comes back to, as it always does in security, not biting off more than we can chew and having sort of a risk-aligned approach that really is based upon what's reality. We can't drain the business over this, but we do need to stay on top of it. And also, I think having the motions in place, I don't know if I'm allowed to mention vendor names, but when the big 2021 incident happened, there were a whole bunch of us behind the scenes that were all working and talking and correlating and communicating. And very quickly, what you'll notice is things go up the TTP stack really quickly. And I've exhausted a lot of my memory since then, but I remember where I was when I got the first phone call. And fortunately, I wasn't like a Rob Chaffee that like lost everything in it. I'm just a vendor trying to play nice. And I remember I got a call from Hans Loven over at Huntress, and two people I pick up right away when they call me is Hans Loven and then Chris Lair. Those two people call me. I'm like, okay, hold on, I got to pick this up. And we were talking through some of the stuff Huntress was seeing in those early days. And some of the things that were really valuable were not just the IP level stuff. It was, if you see this file, this is what we need to be looking for. And if I remember right, they replaced that file with like an innocuous version of it. I don't remember anymore. But that's the kind of stuff that is so dang valuable because now we're taking action on, like, again, what we used before, cutting the head off a snake. And that's where we want to get. And just know there's really smart people out there that when you start sharing, they can take a little piece that you think is not valuable at all that ends up being solid gold in the overall protection of the herd.
It works. So I would argue it works in the other way too. And I'm going to give an example of where I've seen this recently. They're on top of the ISAO in the other places. I don't know about you, but I'm in like a stack of signal groups. And one of the signal groups is Channel's cybersecurity group. And somebody posted in it, I don't know, probably 2 months ago that they were seeing this activity and asking if anyone else was seeing similar activity. As it turns out, no one else was. Right. So there's also the negative connotation of that. Whereas if you're seeing a type of attack against a type of industry and it's hitting multiple of your clients and no one else is seeing that type of activity, you might have a problem. Right. This might be an early indicator. And in just knowing that somebody is or is not seeing similar patterns informs you with a ton of data that you can use to either make everyone safer or to go, oh crap, I might have a problem here and I might need to start digging into this more.
Exactly. I don't know that this should ever be a project that should be picked up, but it'd be pretty dang cool. We had a couple of the large banks that we worked with actually built out basically a data lake that was all queryable over API. And what it did was all of us banks would submit, basically think of them as like snort style alerts. Whenever we would see like
Yep.
a basic IDS alert trip on something, what it would do is it wouldn't send everything. It would just send it would send the alert name, the
Yep.
criticality, it would send, and then basically a couple IOCs like IP addresses was the big thing.
Yeah.
And I forget.
Source IP.
Yes, exactly. And I forget the name of the project. It doesn't matter. But what's so valuable about that was sometimes when we were seeing something, and I'm like, I just don't know what to make of this. I could go over there and use that API. I could call it. I could look just for that IP address, and you know what it would do?
Yeah.
It was so cool. It would return back to me anybody who had seen it along with that bank name, and then I could go correlate in the ISAC and go find that person and say, "Saw you saw that too. What did y'all do about it?" And there were 3 or 4 times I did that, or someone reached out to me. It was just really cool because it was a powerful way for us to be able to start of like really say, well, what are others seeing on this? And do I need to worry about this or do I not? And the problem is we shut it down because the data lake just got so enormous and it was difficult for us to just the cost of maintaining it.
If only we had a benevolent organization that might be able to fund a data lake like that. Maybe we could spin something like that up ourselves. Oops, I said out loud. I think there's a ton of value there. And I think that, as MSP owners, our initial inclination is, well, I'll just buy a tool to do that, right? Like, and I think that a lot of the stuff it even goes beyond that, right? It's like there is value to the data lake. There would be value to a data lake like that integrating with other tools. But man, I would love that. I would love to see like, hey, I'm seeing phishing attempts from XYZ domain. Like, is anyone else seeing them? I'm seeing connection attempts. In the case of the one that we saw the other day, they were seeing successful logins that were only being blocked by MFA against clients on break glass accounts, right? And so if I could correlate that and I could go to a data lake saying like, hey, I'm seeing logins from this IP and no one else is seeing it or a lot of other people are seeing it, like now we've provided value for now. I'm going to make a form submission, right? I might not do it otherwise, right? I might just assume that it's a one-off thing. But if I'm seeing a correlation of a pattern inside of a data lake I can query, I would definitely go do some sort of query. So what type of information should we be sharing as MSPs? Like, I'm going to naively say, right? Like, I'm even in that boat, right? I share stuff out, but a lot of the stuff I actually bring to the forum, there are other news articles that I've gotten from other places. And I myself have been bad about sharing our own internal data for the exact reasons that we called out here. It's like this is so small. I've shared a couple of things where it does seem to be bigger and seem to be going across multiple clients, but is there a point where it is too insignificant and we should not be sharing it?
Yeah. It's, I guess a couple things I would say. One is if you find yourself spending like hours formulating what you're seeing in this threat report, you're probably doing too much, right? Because none of us are going to have the ability to afford a full-time threat analyst. That's going to eat your margin. You just can't do it.
Yep.
So therefore, I would say what is easy for me to share and what is going to be relevant. So, I mean, like when we scroll back up in the chat to look at that TTP and pain I'm about to reference, I wouldn't worry, generally speaking, too much about things like hashes unless you have a lot of confidence that that thing that you saw is not going to change all that much. So I would really just focus on probably IPs and domain names is where I would focus, simply because it's easy for us to all correlate that. And then it becomes an easier way for us to all say, I saw that too. Oh, I can dig a little more, and now I can give a little context. Actually, I saw that come through on this email. Less about who it came from, although that can be important, and more about maybe what was in the subject and what they wrote inside of it, right? So that will unlock the ability for more people to see and share. And that's where I think focusing on those is easier for us and more effective for us.
So I'm going to go in a spicy direction a little bit here, right? Like most of our people use tools to do this stuff, right? At what point should we be pushing on our vendors to share this data too, right? Because obviously they have in general, a much more correlatable size. Did you see that in the FSI SAC that some of your processors or the security platforms or the banking platforms that were used by multiple clients, that they were sharing information back to the ISAC, or was it mostly the individual banks?
So there's politics, unfortunately, that got involved here. And let me say this in a way that I'm not demeaning FSISAC at all. Just because they're the biggest doesn't mean they're the best, the most effective, anything. And this is just what I'm about to say is just Wes's opinion. So just keep that in mind. But one of the things that I think they exist that was a challenge is we did have all the vendors that were part of FSISAC, but the membership criteria to be part of FSISAC itself, according to law, you had to be a financial institution, not a service provider of those like think of an FIS, a FISERV. So they were very involved, but they weren't allowed into a lot of the discussions that we had. So they sort of kept on the side. And this is where I think we have a problem is that we have to understand the way legislature is written for ISACs was written in the 90s before what we've seen today has really materialized, right? I mean, think about threats in the 90s, especially cyber threats. And so, unfortunately, I think that separation, that firewall between the members and the vendors caused a lot of problems. And so they would participate, but more on the fusion center side, where they were seeing their own things and then sending it to FSISAC and then hoping those things would be collected, disseminated. They weren't involved in those internal discussions, and that really made it a big challenge. And so, I would encourage the GTIA ISAO. Bam, I did it. No extra drinks for y'all. To think about how do we collectively bring the vendors in a non-evil way that gets them participating, brings them into these discussions, because let's be honest, the MDRs of the world probably have more burden to shoulder on all of this than the individual MSP. So then that gets into how do we share things correctly and safely. And I'm no lawyer here, but there is safe harbor that comes with information sharing. So this goes way back to the 2015 Cybersecurity Information Sharing Act that came out. And basically it said you have the ability to share intelligence and indicators of compromise with your ISAC or ISAO, and you're not going to be held liable for that as long as what you're sharing doesn't violate antitrust, as long as what you're sharing doesn't violate client attorney privilege, all that kind of stuff. And so that gives the vendors the ability to play. So we have to set it up better to allow the vendors to come in, is what I'm trying to say.
Well, I think I think there's a mind shift that has to happen there, that I think that there's a lot of people in the space that would consider that data to be proprietary and the thing that makes them special. It's probably not, right? Like, and I would argue, as somebody that's close to a lot of players in this space, there's a ton of wasted effort. There's a ton of effort where three very smart people are independently researching the same thing. Yeah. They're probably going to come to the same conclusion, but they're going to come to the same conclusion 3 times as long or even more than if the 3 of them got together and shared data and collaborated. And we have seen in instances where we've had big, huge threats. I'm going back to like Log4Shell, right? I'm going back to Slash and Grab, this Screen Connect vulnerability. I'm going back to the Big K event of 2021. We have seen instances where vendors have put that like competitiveness aside and worked together to try to get the big picture, right? So like, how do we, like, what do we as our MSPs, what should we be telling our vendors along those lines? Should we be asking them to participate to share data for the betterment of everybody?
Yeah, I think that there are some cybersecurity douchebags that are out there, but the vast majority of security researchers are wonderful human beings that only want to help. And so if we think about it from that perspective, most of them are happy to jump into working with competitors, working with people inside and outside the industry, interfacing with the government, interfacing with the ISAO. They're happy to do that. We as the leadership of vendors need to support that. So if I'm the CEO of, let's call it, Wes's MDR, I need to make sure that I say, look, I want the news lead. I want to be the one that says, according to a threat researcher at Wes's MDR, we found these things. I get it. Like, it's good for the PR, it's good for the company, but we also can't sacrifice the good of the MSP to be able to do that. And there might just be times we play second seat to this, right? So I say all of that to say this. I think as MSPs, y'all should set the standard of expectation. And what better conduit than the ISAO to do this, to say, this is what we expect. Just like doctors have that whole, health first, and I don't care how much you're going to pay me or not. Like, you come in, you're sick, I've got to do care to take care of you. Same kind of thing that we should have is we expect the MSP comes first among the vendors, and the expectation of sharing comes first. And we're going to support and collect and expect that. And if we detect that something hasn't happened, you've broken a rule of trust with us, and we're going to hold you accountable to that. So I think documenting that and making that a standard is a very important thing. That's what I would do.
Yeah. I mean, one of the reasons that I'm relatively passionate about this is I believe that there needs to be essentially a vendor neutral party that is for the good of the industry and not for the good of any one individual in the industry. And that in that trade organization, we'll call it, has a duty and a right to support the community and the channel as a whole. And one of the reasons I've given a bunch of time and effort to this is I believe that GTIA has the resources and the ability to do that, right? More than anybody else in the space, I believe they have the vendor neutralness that can actually hold this. What I don't want to see, right, is a ConnectWise ISAO and a Kaseya ISAO, and you really lose the ability to share that data when it ends up being in a bunch of different sources.
Yeah, it needs to be under a nonprofit umbrella. It needs to be under someone that is standing up for the MSP ultimately, but happy to work, because we can't do this without the vendors. And I don't know how the budgets work and all that, but a lot of times in the FS-ISAC world, I went from being a bank to then going over to Perch. And when we first started Perch, I didn't even know what an MSP was. We were only focused on banks. Yeah. And so I saw the dark side of how ISAOs can work, in the sense of oh, I get it. So I have to pay enormous amounts of money for membership and enormous amounts of money to come to your conferences. And then you expect me to also provide you all this data just so I can get FaceTime with my banks, so I can sell Perch to them. And I'm like, I don't like this. This doesn't work. So both sides of it don't work well. We have to find that mutual middle end. So I'm with you, but we got to find a way to say to the vendor, how do we incentivize you to come into this ecosystem in a way that's good for you, but good for the MSP ultimately. Yeah. And that's the trick of it.
Yeah, and I think that eventually you can hit a critical mass where the data that you're pushing into that and the data that is in the organization becomes valuable enough that if contributing is a requirement to receive the data, right, then you start to see people willing to contribute just because the value of the data is high enough, right? But I think there's definitely a case where the data isn't as proprietary as everyone thinks it is, right? This data came from stuff happening on the internet generally, and stuff happening on the internet isn't that private. Let's be real.
Yeah.
Let's pivot for a second and talk about traffic light protocol, TLP, right? Because I think that as we start to discuss data and we start to discuss how we share data, I think that's very important. CNWR and I think GTIA, we're members of JCDC, right? So I'm in CISA Slack, and ironically enough, CISA Slack is very similar to an ISAO in that literally we're doing threat sharing in there, right? And the TLP in there matters very much. So you want to give us a little brief intro to what TLP is?
Yeah, think of it as a way to sort of handle not just the classification of data, but the confidentiality of it, right? So if you go back to original security theory, you have that triad of integrity, confidentiality, and availability, right? And so this really deals with that confidentiality perspective. And so one of the things that we need to do is we need to have an organized, accepted standard of trust. And so I can share with you, and I'll explain what they are in a minute, but I can share with you something that might be TLP red, and then you could go break that trust. But what we're doing here is I can't stop that, right? This is not top secret clearance and no one can actually physically even see it and access it unless you're in a SCIF and all that kind of crap. But it's not what it is. Yeah. It's a way for me to say my expectation of what I'm about to share is this level, and I expect you to adhere to that. And if you break it, now I have I know you broke it. If the evidence gets out, because I I designate it that way. It's a way to say, to remove assumptions. So basically what it is, you can see what Lisa posted. I don't have to kind of repeat all that for you, but usually the standard is like TLP Amber is what's going to be, that's going to be the default. So unless I designate it as a lower level or a higher level, Amber is what it's going to be. And the reason Amber is pretty good is because it lets us share that information with other members, but not really with anyone else, right? Not other
with
clients,
the public,
all that.
Yeah. But you can share it with like the entire ISAO. You can share it with your clients. So you've been out of this world for a little bit. There is now a new thing called Amber Plus Strict, which Amber Plus Strict means you can share it within your organization, but not downstream of it. Yeah. Actually, I see that quite frequently on the CISA side, right? So it's like I'm allowed to tell people in CNWR, but I'm not allowed to take it to the ISAO, for instance. And that's generally unfortunate because that's some of usually the juicier intel. But I understand too why people might not want it out there. Usually that's data shared from a very large company, and that data may have proprietary source information about the company that they don't want out there. It usually doesn't have anything to do with the attack. It has everything to do with the infrastructure being attacked that they don't want to share.
Yeah, and we've seen this happen before, haven't we? Where like some kind of nation state level threat has occurred or incident has occurred, and the federal government actually gets involved and they say, you're not talking about this to anybody, and we're putting a gag order on you because it's important to the actual security of the country, the nation itself. And that I understand why those things happen, because maybe they're still tracking the threat actor. They don't want the threat actor to know that they've been discovered, so it has to be gagged completely. Those things do happen, but it's rare. And so that's where I didn't know about the Amber Strict, and I'm kind of with you. I think it's I understand why it might be there, but for the most part, we shouldn't have to worry about that. Most things that we want to be able to share are going to be protected by law because of safe harbor. And they're going to be able to be allowed to have a mechanism where it can be discussed inside the ISAC and its members. And then this is where, again, I would advocate to some degree of letting the vendors have some type of membership in so that we don't have that firewall that the bigger ISACs sometimes have that actually makes things worse rather than better.
Yeah. Cool. Well, let's see. Does anyone have questions? I think we've covered the vast majority of what we wanted to cover here, right? Like we have a call to action at the end, which is basically give us your threats. But let's open up the floor to any questions. Does anyone want to come off mute and ask a question of Wes or I?
I'm gonna pick. Can I pick someone?
Absolutely.
I'm going to pick Bob Miller. Bob, I really respect you. Give us your thoughts on just the overall state of MSPs, their maturity around this, the need for this, just an open-ended. What's your thoughts and reactions, Bob?
Somebody has to make Bob, Lisa, make Bob immutable.
I'm trying. Let's see.
The Teams webinar platform, it's not my favorite. I mean, Teams is, let's be real, it's not my favorite.
Yeah, I got it.
Well, then I'm terrible at it. So, Bob, can you talk now? I think I gave you the option.
He's hiding. He's being shy today. Nope, still.
I see the three dots and then...
now I got it.
It
flipped on for a minute. Man, as soon as he said, well, do you want somebody to come and ask questions? He says, well, I'm going to pick somebody. I knew what was going to happen. But as it relates, honestly, as it relates to this, though, as far as MSP maturity, I would say that Jason's organization is not the standard. Right. Yeah. So you're in an advanced category. I would say that the average MSP, and for good reason, in a lot of cases, you guys were talking about that, the ability to get a hold of this threat intelligence. It takes a lot of time to organize a lot of those open feeds yourself if you're going to do it yourself. And it's very expensive if you're trying to get somebody who's an aggregator to do it. I remember evaluating it early on when we started our program, and the price per data feed on that was so outrageous. Even the size we really couldn't afford to bite down on that. Right now, I would say nowadays, so in general, I would say that MSPs in general they're not nearly where we would want them to be as it relates to being able to get those feeds, incorporate them into their processes, and actually utilize them on a daily basis. I'm willing to bet that is, I'm willing to bet just about everybody would agree that that's just not something that's normally done. I would say the one thing I can say is that in the recent months or so, the ability to use some of these LLM engines to be able to kind of metabolize some of that weird data sources that we're getting now is making it possible for smaller groups to kind of automate some of that and get it into a form that they can then utilize much easier, like put it into a standard that they can feed into other things. So while I believe it's mostly because of the time and effort to build those automations in the past that were a problem, I think we're getting past that now. And so I think we're going to see a lot more advancement in this in the next 6 or 8 months, just because you can automate the devil out of a lot of this now without having to spend weeks and weeks or months trying to build it up. Right?
Jason, I want to ask you a question.
Yep.
You're right, Bob. And my question that Bob's making me think of is, Jason, are we at a point right now with AI to where we could, if we had a data lake of this much data, that we could build trustworthy analysis out of it without hallucinations that steer us off the path?
I think so too. I think so. It might not always be an LLM, but I think there are a lot of, I'm just going to say automations that we could use around that. One of the big things I'm trying to push for as we evaluate, right? Because right now we use a forum. I'm not sure a forum is the right answer to this, but I don't know what the alternative is that's any better. One of the things I really want is I want the end users to be able to go in and select, I hate this word, their stack. So basically, but not even for them, right? I want end users to be able to go in and maybe choose their verticals they support plus the software that they support, right? Like if I don't have anyone with QuickBooks, I don't really need to see anything about QuickBooks, but then have even the email notifications that you get be specific to that, right? Because right now there's, I think, all ISAOs and all information sharing, there's a signal to noise problem, right? So it's like there is a lot of data, and picking out the stuff that's relevant to me can be challenging, frankly. Like that is not a solved problem yet, but I believe we're close to solving it.
Yeah, I think it's a combination, like you said. LLMs in and of themselves are just for handling arbitrary language issues, right? Which you get a lot of, right? As these reports come out in different formats with different vocabularies and different dialogues because they come from different organizations. That's where I think LLMs can kind of help filter that, right? And get it down to the meat of the subject and then allow you to at least get the pieces you want. And then other automations will need to be able to do things like feed it into whatever feeds you want to put it into. But now's the time to be thinking about this because I think it is actually plausible to do this regardless of your size. But I'm also in mad agreement with you guys that we have to be thinking in terms of a community-based project to kind of do this because if we don't, then we know what can happen with that, right? From we'll have 15 versions of it from 15 different vendors.
Yeah, that XKCD 927 is my favorite XKCD, the standards one.
Yeah, that's yes. So I'll cast a vision for y'all that I think would be cool, and I think would, as far as I know, you'd be the very first ISAC or ISAO to do this. If you had a community-driven and adopted data lake in which you had an easy way for high-level IOCs to feed into that, and then you had some type of AI around this or automations, whatever it is you want to call it in a buzz-free way that gives some amount of intelligence of what's happening across the entire collective. No one's done that before that I know of. And imagine being able to do that with the vast majority of MSPs playing into this, which then means the vast majority of the SMB sector. That is notable. But the way it has to be done is it has to be very, very simple to build, to configure, to send, to be maintained. It just has to be. That's the trick of it. But if that could be done, I see that as a black hat worthy, an RSA worthy type of like, look what we built and look at some of the data that we're pulling out of this and how it's working. And by the way, it's open source. If other ISACs and ISAOs want to do the same thing, like that would be really pretty amazing.
And they've got me thinking, I need my next Claude Code project.
Where's assemble
it'll
the
fit
dream
in that.
team. Yeah,
It would be
get
fun
Kelvin
to do
involved, Ash involved, and we'll get this thing going, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and I honestly think that is the way forward, right? Like we all have to, and I think that's to wrap this and to pull it back all the way around, is we all have to get out of our heads that this type of data is either one, not important, right? Or like not, it's too insignificant to matter, or two, that it's proprietary, right? Like it's not that proprietary, right? And it is very important, and it is the correlation that you can do across larger data sets is way better than the data that each of us individually have. Okay. Any final thoughts before we bring Lisa back up and do the CTA and wrap this thing up, since we're at the 10-minute mark?
The last thing I think I'll come back to is, let's just remember, let's come back to this big thing. Let's remember that we see success in iteration. Big visions are wonderful. You know, when JFK said we're going to the moon, and everyone's now said within the decade we're going to get to the moon, that's the moonshot. These are the big visions. But just know that success happens in iterations, right? And so little small things are a win. So I'd say if you're listening today, I'm assuming you're a member of the GTI ISAO. See, no drinks again. But if you're not, go join it, and then find easy ways to start contributing, and then make sure you have someone dedicated in your MSP to be able to read the reports that come out of it. And I think if you start with those things and you build that into your incident response processes, I think that's a huge win, because then when the big things happen, you have some of the muscle memory to start acting on some of this and doing something with it. And that's where I would start. Keep it really simple here, and don't exhaust yourself in all of this.
Yeah, I would wholeheartedly agree with that, right? Like you, if you bite off more than you can chew, then you'll burn yourself out and you'll quit. So keep it approachable, keep it easy, keep it simple. And as your maturity improves and your ability to deal with the data, both sending and consuming, improves, then level it up. Don't start by trying to automate all the things and suck them all in and do all these weird workflows with IOCs. Like, don't start there, right? Like, don't start with automated submissions, right? Like, start simple and work up from there. Lisa, you want to pop the slide deck back up so we can CTA and wrap this thing up? Look at you. Yeah, so again, we are the GTIA ISAO, right? Like we have threat reports, right? Like they come, they're great. Just was reviewing some that came this morning about some activity in the telecom sector that could impact people. We have the real-time repository, which is Level Blue. Speaking of things with 9 names, I think it's Alien Vault, AT&T, Level Blue, OTX, or some, like, I don't know, they just keep appending names to it. But it's a neat tool where we have a private group that's got data from the IT ISAC and stuff we're seeing, plus public stuff and stuff from other ISACs that we can consume. We have monthly member meetups. We just had a ransomware negotiator from Charles River on that basically told us all the dirty, dark secrets of how ransomware groups negotiate in a way that he could never do in a recorded fashion. If you weren't there, you really missed out, because it was amazing. So if you are a member, you should definitely be attending those. Definitely not because I have been leading them, but because people way smarter and cooler than me have been contributing really cool data to them. And then, yeah, we have the Cyber Hub, which is our forum that we use to share data. And pretty soon we have basically a risk reporting thing that you'll be able to use. And the nice thing about a lot of these tools, most MSPs couldn't afford OTX. Right, most MSPs couldn't afford Orpheus, and GTIA has been kind enough via the ISAO to go get contracts with these things and allow us to use them, which has been, a great takeaway there. So next slide it up, Lisa. Yep, and then the takeaway here is, right, like if you are a member and you're not, if you're an MSP member, you get the ISAO. Right, like it's included for everybody. So just all you have to do is log in. And unlike, I'm going to get in trouble. Unlike the rest of GTI, you can log into the ISAO portal.
Hey.
It is at isao.gtia.org. You can log in there and register. That's where you can register for our member meetups. That's where the resources generally live. If you're not a member, it's not that expensive. It's $450 annually to join. If you email Lisa, she might even be able to dig up a code that gives you a year free. Those used to be given away like they were candy, but they're a little harder to find these days. And that's it. We'll take any final questions here, and I was at about 20 after, very afraid that we weren't going to fill an hour, but I think we probably could have gone for another 20 minutes.
I was going to say the same thing. I'm like, this is like a 10-minute discussion, Jason.
Yeah.
Here we go.
So, okay. Well, if there's nothing else, then we'll go ahead and wrap this up, and I'll talk to you all next month at the member meetup.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks.
Thanks for joining us. Thank you,
See y'all.
Jason. We appreciate you guys.